My name is Laurel, and I was born to people who didn't want me. My mother used to say it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. You were a surprise, she'd tell anyone who asked, with a shrug and a polite smile. Sometimes, when she forgot I was in the room, it became, we didn't plan for her. Honestly, we were done after Selena. Then she'd trail off, pretending there was nothing cruel in the silence that followed. Selena, my sister, was already 10 years old when I came along. By then, she was the center of their world, a straight-A student piano recitals, endless soccer games, and science fairs. There were photos of her everywhere, on the mantle on the fridge, even laminated into ornaments on the Christmas tree. I didn't appear in those photos until I was old enough to hold the camera and take them. No one ever said they hated me. They didn't have to. Indifference speaks loudest when it's dressed as politeness. I learned early to stay small, to not ask twice to clean up after myself. They fed me dressed. Me reminded me when school started. But the warmth, the softness that families are supposed to have, it lived elsewhere. That elsewhere was my grandparents' home. Every weekday morning after a silent breakfast, my father would grab his keys and glance at me. "She's ready," he'd ask my mom. "Yep," she'd reply, not looking up from her coffee. Then we'd drive to my grandparents' small yellow house where the curtains always swayed in the breeze and something was always baking in the oven. "You're our little blessing," my grandmother would whisper every time she hugged me. My grandfather called me his girl and taught me how to count change and tie double knots. At their house, I wasn't an afterthought. I was someone they had waited for. They picked me up from school, packed extra snacks in my lunchbox, and clapped louder than anyone at the third-grade talent show where I froze halfway through my poem. "You were brilliant," Grandpa said anyway, as if I'd brought the whole room to tears. I started to believe him, at least when I was with them. When Selena left for college, my parents didn't cry. They threw her a party with pastel cupcakes and a big "You Did It" banner across the kitchen window. My mother made a slideshow of childhood photos. My father gave a speech. "She's going to do great things," he said, proudly lifting his glass. I stood in the corner holding the used paper plates and wondering if they'd ever see me that clearly. The morning after Selena left, everything changed, not with a bang, but with a quiet list taped to the fridge. Dishes, laundry, vacuum upstairs, prep dinner, no signature, just expectation. "Since you're the only one at home now," my mother said that night as I scrubbed the sink, "it's only fair you help more." More became everything. I learned the difference between darks and lights in the wash. How to scrape dried food off pans. How to slice vegetables just right so dinner wouldn't be too mushy. My parents rarely said thank you. They only noticed when something wasn't done. "You live here," my father would say, "you need to contribute." Selena always did, but she hadn't not like this. Selena got a weekly allowance for unloading the dishwasher. I cleaned the whole house before anyone noticed I existed in it. At first, I did it because I didn't know how not to. I was invisible, and invisible girls didn't make demands. But somewhere between the laundry cycles and the silence, something began to shift. I started staying up late, not because I had chores, but because I was browsing college websites on the old family laptop. Oregon State, UC Davis, even NYU, though I knew better than to hope that far. I read admissions blogs the way other kids read fairy tales. I studied dorm layouts and imagined my own name on a mailbox. Not because I thought anyone would send me letters, but because it would be my name, my key, my room. I stopped waiting for anyone to notice I was tired. I did the work. I cleaned the toilets. Then I'd sneak in an hour reading about scholarships, calculating GPAs, whispering goals into the dark. It was the only kind of dreaming I could afford. The acceptance letters came in a wave, 3 in 1 week. Each envelope felt like oxygen, like someone out there had seen past the chores and the silence, and decided I was worth a place at their table. I lined them up neatly on the dinner table one night, heart-pounding, waiting for a reaction. My mother barely glanced up from her plate. "That's nice," she said, then passed the salt to my father. I waited, thinking maybe they hadn't understood. "I got into all 3, I repeated, quieter this time. My father swallowed a bite of meatloaf, then sighed. "We can't pay for any of them." At first, I thought he was joking. But then my mother put down her fork and added, "We spent most of our savings on Selena's wedding. Even took out a loan for the reception." "You knew that." "But you paid for her college?" I said the words brittle. That was different, she replied. We saw potential in her. My chest tightened. The table went quiet again, as if they hadn't just cracked something open inside me. You should get a job, my father said after a moment. Save up, apply for loans. That's what responsible adults do. I got up without asking to be excused. My hands were shaking. I climbed the stairs, closed my door, and pressed my phone to my ear with trembling fingers. My grandmother picked up on the second ring. Sweetheart, she said. What's wrong? I couldn't even speak at first. Just cried. Within 15 minutes, I was at their front door. My grandfather opened it before I knocked. They didn't ask questions, just pulled me into their arms like they'd been expecting this moment. When I finally told them everything, my grandfather's eyes darkened. My grandmother stayed quiet. Her mouth set in a line that only deepened with each word I spoke. Then he got up and walked into his study. He came back holding a worn brown folder. We've been saving for your education since the day you were born, he said, handing it to me. Inside were bank statements, enough to make all 3 letters possible. You pick the school, he said softly. We'll handle the rest. And just like that, everything shifted. I moved into my grandparents' home 2 weeks before freshman orientation. My mother didn't help me pack. My father didn't ask where I was going. Selena didn't call. I left behind a room I had scrubbed spotless, a house where silence had always been louder than any goodbye. At my grandparents' house, I had a real desk, a door that locked, a warm breakfast every morning. They took me shopping for notebooks, helped me organize my financial aid paperwork, and drove me to campus like it was the first day of something sacred. My grandfather kissed the top of my head when he dropped me off. Go make us proud, he said, even though I already knew I had. I chose finance because I wanted to understand the very thing my parents had used to hold power over me. I wanted to know how money worked, how to make it protect. It grow it. The language of numbers became something I could trust. It didn't lie, didn't play favorites. Classes were hard, but I loved the clarity. I stayed late at the library, asked questions professors hadn't heard in years. For the first time, I felt seen, not for what I cleaned or cooked, but for how I thought. At home, I kept my distance. My parents didn't reach out, and I didn't chase them. The space grew larger with each passing semester, and I let it. Meanwhile, Selena's perfect life started to crack. My grandmother would mention things during phone calls, how Selena's marketing job had downsized, how James couldn't hold steady work, how the wedding glow had dulled fast. They're struggling, Grandma would say, always gently, never asking for anything. I listened, but I didn't respond. I had no advice for someone who'd always been handed everything. Sophomore year, I landed a competitive internship at a boutique financial firm. My supervisor, a sharp woman named Dana, pulled me aside one afternoon. You've got instinct, she said. Don't let anyone waste it. I wrote those words in a journal I kept tucked inside my backpack, the same backpack I'd carried since high school, still stained from scrubbing countertops. And still the past found ways to reach me. My grandfather died on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was in the middle of midterms when the call came. The world didn't slow down, not the classes, the exams, or the traffic outside my dorm, but I did. I sat on the floor of the hallway, clutching my phone, trying to breathe through the emptiness. I made it home in time to help plan the funeral. My grandmother's hands trembled when she poured tea. She kept setting out 2 cups, forgetting he wouldn't need his anymore. We sat in silence most days until one afternoon she looked at me and said, "He always believed in you. So do I." She passed just 7 weeks later. Her absence hit even harder, not just because she was the last, but because she'd been my safe place since before I could spell the word family. After the service, we gathered in a paneled office for the reading of the will. I expected formality. I didn't expect the shock. To our granddaughter Laurel, the attorney read, "We leave our home at 319 Astor Lane in the sum of $150,000. My parents stiffened in their chairs. Selena looked confused. Then came the note. "To our daughter Miriam and her husband Charles. We gave you $200,000 when you asked for it. This is our final decision." My mother turned a deep, blotchy red. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Later that night, back at the house, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the hardwood floors we used to play board games on. My mind couldn't stop circling one question. They asked for that money, I asked aloud. Yes, came a voice behind me. It was Mr. Delaney, my grandparents' longtime friend and estate advisor. About a year ago. Your grandmother was heartbroken over it. Said she wished they'd waited. Or that she'd said no. I ran my fingers over the deed now in my name. Their house. Their savings. What they'd worked their whole lives to build split between the child they believed in and the ones who only remembered them when they needed rescue. I didn't cry. I just sat there holding the keys in one hand and the weight of everything they'd left behind in the other. Years passed. I worked hard, moved through promotions, saved more than I spent. I never chased luxury, just stability and the kind of dignity my grandparents would have nodded at. I bought my first condo by 26, built an emergency fund by 27, and by 28 I stopped needing to explain myself to anyone. My parents had grown quieter over time. We exchanged holiday texts. Sometimes I visited. Selena and James had moved back in with them after their third failed lease. The house I'd grown up in looked tired now, peeling paint, sagging gutters, too many bodies under one roof. One Sunday dinner, I watched my father rub his knee as he eased himself into a creaky dining chair. My mother winced every time she bent to pick up after Selena's boys. You need a house that fits this stage of life, I said gently. One with no stairs. Safer, more comfortable. They blinked in surprise. I've been saving, I added. I want to buy it for you. They didn't refuse. In fact, they cried. My mother clutched my hand and said, You're too good to us. My father pulled me into a hug I hadn't expected. We toured listings together, eventually finding a one-story ranch with wide doorways, a quiet street, and enough garden space for my mother's fading rose bushes. I paid in full. No loans, no favors, just closure. The papers were drawn up. I met with my lawyer ready to transfer the deed, but something tugged at me. I left the folder unsigned on my desk, thinking I'd do it after the housewarming party they promised to plan. They were thrilled about the party. We'll handle everything, my mother said. You've done enough already. I believed her. Weeks passed. No date. No invites. Whenever I called, they gave vague responses. We want it to be perfect, my father said once. Still picking a good weekend, my mother added another time. It wasn't until I saw Selena's name pop up on a tagged Facebook post that I understood. So excited for Mom and Dad's housewarming this Saturday, she'd written her boys smiling in front of a balloon arch in the background. I stared at the screen. I hadn't been invited. I parked a block away, careful not to draw attention. From the corner of the street, I could already hear the music-light jazz spilling out from open windows, the clink of glass, the hum of laughter. A row of cars lined the driveway, balloons tied to the porch railings. In the distance, I saw my mother wave cheerfully at someone pulling up with a casserole dish. They'd been planning this for weeks. I walked up the path, slowly passing familiar faces I hadn't seen in years. Family friends, second cousins, neighbors who used to ignore me when I was a child scrubbing the porch. No one noticed me now either, though not because I was invisible. I wasn't expected. The front door was unlocked. I stepped into the entryway as my father's voice carried through the living room. It took a lot of sacrifice, but we finally did it. Our forever home. Applause followed. Then my mother chimed in. And of course, Selena was a huge help with the down payment. Always so thoughtful, that girl. She takes care of us, my father added. Not like, well. Some people just get too busy. I took a step forward. Some people, I said, clearly own this house. Heads turned. The music stopped. My parents froze mid-sip. Laurel. My mother stammered, we didn't expect, you didn't invite me. I cut in. To the party for the house I bought. The house I still own. My father's face shifted into something tight and artificial. Now's not the time for this. Oh, I think it is, I said, pulling the folder from my bag. I opened it slowly, letting the deed catch the light. This house isn't yours. You never signed anything. You've told all these people it is, but it's not. We assumed, my mother said, her voice cracking. You said it was for us. I said I wanted to help you, not be erased. Whispers rippled through the room. Selena looked pale. James stared at his shoes. One of the twins tugged at his balloon string and said, "Why is Auntie Laurel mad?" I turned to face the guests. "Party's over," I said calmly. "This house isn't theirs." And it never was. The room was still as I stood in the center holding the deed like a mirror they couldn't look away from. My parents' smiles had crumbled into something hollow. Selena's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You told everyone this was your house," I said steady. "You planned to live here with Selena and her family." "You lied." My mother's voice rose desperate. "We're your parents. We thought after everything we thought you'd give it to us." "I was going to," I replied. "At the party you never invited me to. We needed a place my father said hands out like he could reason his way back into the lie. We sold the old house. We thought it was safe." I nodded. "It was, until you decided I didn't matter enough to be in the story." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some picked up their bags. One couple made a quick exit. The truth clung to the air like smoke. "You're being cruel," Selena muttered, pulling her kids close. "Think of the boys." "I am," I said quietly. "And I hope they never learn to treat family the way I was treated." I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just walked to the front door and held it open. One by one they left. My parents, Selena, James, the guests. No one argued, no one apologized. They just gathered their coats and casseroles and left like a parade of regret. When the last car pulled away, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the cool air pressing against my skin. The silence was absolute, not empty, not sad, just mine. In the days that followed, the calls came in waves, first from my mother, then Selena, then James. I didn't answer. The messages grew more urgent, then pitiful, then angry. Eventually, they stopped. I blocked every number, every email, every attempt at guilt dressed as concern. I wasn't interested in rehashing what they had already chosen, a life where I didn't exist unless I was useful. Word got around that they moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Selena's boys shared a room with bunk beds. My parents took the smaller bedroom. Their old house was gone, and so was their plan to live in mine. I gave the house one last walkthrough, touching the corners where my grandparents used to laugh, used to read, used to remind me that I mattered. Then I called the agent, listed it, took the offer, signed the paperwork. The morning the sale went through, I opened my filing cabinet and slipped the deed into a folder labeled closed. It felt right. With the funds, I started planning something for myself. Nothing dramatic, just a future on my own terms. I invested a portion, set some aside, and tucked the rest into an account labeled legacy. Not theirs. Mine. The house was gone. The weight of their need, their excuses, their expectations gone with it. What remained was clean air, a blank space, and a life I didn't have to ask permission to live. I moved into a small cottage at the edge of town. Nothing flashy, just quiet, light-filled mine. There's a corner window where the sun filters in at just the right angle every morning, and I keep a chair there with a blanket folded over the back. I sit there sometimes drinking tea, reading, thinking of them. Not my parents. My grandparents. I keep their photo on the mantel framed in walnut. They're laughing, both of them. Her eyes crinkled, his arm around her shoulder. I don't cry when I look at it anymore. I smile. Every decision I make now carries them with it. The way I manage my money. The way I listen before I speak. The way I remind myself that love isn't loud but steady. Someday, if I have children of my own, they'll never wonder where they stand with me. They won't have to earn affection or compete for a piece of it. They'll know they were chosen, cherished, claimed right from the start. I planted lavender in the front garden last week, my grandmother's favorite. This morning I watered it barefoot, the hose in one hand, sunlight on my face, and the peace of knowing I had broken the cycle.